Today I'm talking to you about gun violence in the city of Chicago. In 2012, there were approximately 500 homicides that were gun related. 2013, currently we're at just about 300, just over 300. In June of 2013, Mayor Emanuel proposed two new ordinances, so two new policies related to guns and the reduction of gun violence. The first was the prohibition of the sale and possession of assault weapons in the city. First, Mayor Emanuel had banned assault weapons in 1992, so this isn't really a new ordinance. Secondly, in the book Point Blank by Gary Kleck, he indicates that ordinary handguns are the weapon of choice in violent crime by criminals, which means that prohibiting assault weapons isn't really going to reduce crime. It's going to have a minimal effect, which is only further established by the 1994 federal ban on assault weapons, in which they indicate that of the over 200 million firearms in possession in residences throughout the United States, only about 1% of them are assault weapons. And as Samuel Walker indicates in Sense and Nonsense, only 2 to 8% of violent crime can be attributed to assault weapons. Now, assault weapons are described as firearms that have a high capacity magazine, the ability to shoot lots of rounds in a short period of time. Now, one major thing is that if there's already over 200 million firearms in possession, placing bans or restrictions on the sales or possession isn't going to reduce that number. There's still going to be that many firearms in the United States, which is only going to increase the likelihood of a black market and black market sale and trade of firearms. All right, the second ordinance is harsh punishment for gun-related offenses, in what he described as student safety zones. Now, student safety zones are near schools, bus stops, on buses, or near park districts. This is actually also an ordinance that already exists in the city of Chicago. Now, there's a new mandatory of 30 days in jail, along with a $1,000 to a $5,000 fine for the first offense. For the second offense, it's 30 days in jail with a $5,000 to $15,000 fine, and the third offense is a 30-day sentence jail, along with a $10,000 to $20,000 fine. Now, two things about this. First, as we read in the chapter on deterrence, not all social or cultural groups are going to be deterred by the threat of harsh punishment. In fact, there's some cultures or some neighborhoods, we'll say, where people are arrested frequently and spend a lot of time in jail or prison. And in those situations in which that occurs over a period of time, it becomes normal. And so if this is normal for somebody growing up, then as they get older, the deterrent effect is lost because it's just an everyday life. It might even be considered a rite of passage. Secondly, in the chapter titled Going Rate for Crime, or Going Rate, chapter 3, we discussed the courtroom work group, in which implementation of policy of this matter is likely to fail because the courtroom work group has already come up with a set price for a given crime, meaning that you have a type of crime, say a weapons violation, it comes into court, and they already have like an agenda of how they're going to handle it, whether they're going to throw it out or give him, time considered served or a fine. So coming up with a policy like this is probably going to have very little effect and just cost the taxpayers more money on attempting to implement it. The city also came up with a policy in which they saturate high crime areas. They came up with this policy based on the fact that 3% of the city or its residents or locations account for 20% of the violence in the city. And then based upon that, they've created what they're calling 20 hotspots or 20 hot zones. And then their idea is to send a saturation of police officers to those areas to reduce crime. And they're calling this Operation Impact. Now, one of the major issues I see with Operation Impact is it basically replaced the Violence Reduction Initiative for Operation Safe City, except they're deploying probationary police officers who have recently graduated from a police academy and have absolutely zero time on the street, which means they have very little experience in actually policing and only know basic concepts of policing. So you're having poorly trained, I guess that's debatable because they did go through the academy, but poorly trained officers going on the streets in an attempt to reduce crime. So essentially, their only reduction strategy is presence, police presence, which is a type of deterrence. I will say, though, that in Chapter 5, they discussed a similar strategy in Lowell, Massachusetts, in which they discovered that 2.7% of the city accounted for 30% of the crime. They came up with 34 hotspots, which they reduced down to 17 by combining neighboring hotspots. And then they implemented problem-oriented policing, where they saturated the area with police officers, but they also did other things like clean up vacant lots, improve outdoor lighting conditions, and improved the general living conditions of those areas. Now, when they did all of those things, they observed an 18% increase in arrests, which arrests aren't always an indication of a decrease in crime. It's just an indication of an increase in policing. They also observed a 42% reduction in calls for service for violent crimes like robberies and batteries and assaults, which is an indication of a decrease in crime. The fact that people aren't calling about these types of things means that they're most likely not occurring anymore, or they're occurring less frequently. Now, during the reading for this course, I read a case brief or a policy brief from the Chicago Justice Project, and it described the long-term costs of police staffing increases. That was the title of the policy brief. Basically, it discussed how the city wants to hire 1,000 to 2,000 more police officers, and that the actual cost associated with that over a 10-year period is approximately $1 billion to $2 billion, and how this money could be better spent. Now, I disagree that we shouldn't hire more police, but I do see the point that the article discussed on collateral efficacy, and the fact that a community needs cohesion, and if the community has cohesion, then crime will be less rampant. So if the community gets along with each other, they take an interest in each other, and they take an interest in each other's lives, there'll be less crime. Now, this article discusses how things like schools and foreclosures have direct impact on the community efficacy. Now, I agree with this, and it's interesting that the city has recently closed 49 schools in Chicago, which just goes to decrease community efficacy and therefore increase the likelihood of crime because the community isn't working together and discussing crime and discussing ways of reducing crime. Also, I looked at the foreclosures that have been occurring in some of the most dangerous neighborhoods. In Austin, there were 4,424 foreclosures within a 4-year period from 2008 to 2012. And they had, in the past year, between September of 2012 and October of 2013, 764 robberies, 549 batteries, 281 assaults, and 31 homicides. Probably the highest in the city for a single neighborhood, with the highest amount of foreclosures. And then you go to another area that has had low foreclosures, like Hegewisch, we'll say, has had 250 foreclosures in the past 4 years, 2008 to 2012. And they only have had 7 robberies, 10 batteries, 6 assaults, and 0 homicides between September of 2012 and October of 2013. Other things, in Austin, there's a 27% living under poverty, 21% unemployed, and 25% with no high school diploma. In Hegewisch, there's 12% living in poverty, 9.6% unemployed, and 18% with no high school diploma. Look at other neighborhoods like Beverly, who has a very low homicide and violent crime rate, and they have only a 5% living under poverty, 7.8% unemployed, and 5% with no high school diploma. So it's an indication that we need to take a bigger interest in education and gainful employment, creating jobs in these communities. As Adler believed, in order to be successful as a person, you have to commit to the tasks of life. The tasks of life are work, friendship, and love. And all of those are based around community. Now we have to take an interest in the community, and that would be the best way to reduce crime. Creating resources for these underprivileged communities living in poverty, below the education standards, unemployed. Create employment, better education, and you decrease the chances of poverty, all decreasing the likelihood of violent crime. Thanks.